Margaret stood in the living room of the house that had been her home for 5 years, her hands trembling as she held her 3-year-old daughter, little Emma. Around her, the family had gathered like a tribunal, ready to condemn without trial. Her husband, David, stood with his arms crossed, his face hardened in a way she had never seen before. His mother, Eleanor, sat in the armchair like a queen on her throne, her eyes gleaming with something Margaret couldn't quite identify. Was it triumph? Satisfaction? "Please, David, let me explain," Margaret begged, her voice breaking. "I don't understand what's happening. What did I do? Just tell me what I did wrong." David looked away, as if the mere sight of his wife caused him pain. "Don't play innocent, Margaret. My mother told me everything. Everything you've been hiding from me all this time." "Hiding? I haven't hidden anything from you." Tears streamed down Margaret's face as Emma began to cry, sensing her mother's distress. "Eleanor, please tell him this is a misunderstanding. Tell him the truth." But Eleanor remained silent, her thin lips pressed together in a line that resembled a cruel smile. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence spoke louder than any words. David's sister, Patricia, stepped forward with a look of disgust. "How could you do this to our family? We welcomed you with open arms, and this is how you repay us." "Do what? What am I being accused of?" Margaret's voice rose in desperation. "Someone tell me. I have the right to know what I'm being accused of." "You don't have any rights in this house anymore," David said coldly, his words cutting like knives. "Pack your things. I want you out of here today. And don't even think about taking Emma. You're not fit to be a mother." "No." Margaret clutched her daughter tighter, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. "You can't take my baby from me. David, please, we can fix this, whatever it is. We can talk, go to church, pray together." "There's nothing to fix," Eleanor finally spoke, her voice dripping with false concern. "Some mistakes are unforgivable, dear. And what you've done, well, it's best if you just leave quietly, without making a scene." Margaret looked around the room, searching for one compassionate face, one person who would stand up for her, give her a chance to defend herself. But she found only cold stares and turned backs. Even Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had always been kind to her, looked away when their eyes met. "I didn't do anything wrong," Margaret whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I've been a good wife, a good mother, a good daughter-in-law. I've served this family with all my heart." "Actions speak louder than words," Eleanor said, standing up slowly. "And your actions have spoken loud and clear." David approached and took Emma from Margaret's arms. The little girl screamed, reaching for her mother, but he held her firmly. "Say goodbye to Mommy, Emma. She's going away for a while." "Forever," Eleanor corrected softly. "She's going away forever." Margaret fell to her knees, her world collapsing around her. She wanted to scream, to fight, to demand answers. But her voice had disappeared, trapped in her throat by the weight of injustice. She had lost everything in an instant: her husband, her daughter, her home, her dignity. And she didn't even know why. As they escorted her to the door with only a small suitcase of clothes, Margaret turned one last time to look at the house where she had tried so hard to belong, to be accepted, to be loved. Emma's cries echoed through the hallway, a sound that would haunt Margaret for years to come. "Please," she whispered one last time, "just tell me what I did." But the door closed in her face, and with it, any chance of defending herself. Standing on the porch of that house in small-town America, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, Margaret had no idea that the pain she felt at that moment was just the beginning. Because that suffering hadn't started that day. It had been carefully prepared, nurtured, and cultivated over time by someone who smiled at her across the dinner table while sharpening the knife that would eventually stab her in the back. But that pain did not begin that day. It had been carefully prepared for a long time. From the very first day Margaret crossed the threshold of the Miller family home, she felt it, that invisible wall that separated her from true belonging. It wasn't anything obvious, nothing she could point to and say, "This is wrong." It was in the silences, the exchanged glances, the suggestions wrapped in false concern. David had brought her home as his bride, proud and in love, but his family received her with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Eleanor, his mother, was a woman of rigid traditions, someone who believed that family bloodlines should remain pure, that outsiders were always a threat to the established order. "Welcome to the family, dear," Eleanor had said on that first day, holding Margaret's hands with a grip that felt more like a warning than a welcome. "I hope you understand that in this house, we have our ways of doing things, ways that have been passed down for generations." And Margaret, wanting so desperately to be accepted, had nodded eagerly. "Of course, Mrs. Miller, I'm here to learn and to fit in." "Oh, but you can call me Mother Eleanor," the older woman had said with a smile that didn't match the coldness in her eyes. "After all, you're family now." But Margaret never truly became family. Over the years, she worked harder than anyone in that house. She woke up before dawn to prepare breakfast exactly the way Eleanor liked it. She kept the house spotless, following every rule, every tradition, every unspoken expectation. She dressed modestly, spoke softly, and never contradicted anyone. "Margaret, dear, that's not how we fold the napkins in this family," Eleanor would say, unfolding Margaret's careful work and doing it again. "Let me show you the proper way. Margaret, we don't season the food that way. That's not how it's done in this house. Margaret, those aren't appropriate clothes for church service. What will people think?" Every correction was delivered with a sweet smile and a gentle tone, but beneath it all was an unmistakable message. "You don't belong here. You'll never be good enough. You'll never be one of us." David noticed sometimes. "Mum, don't be so hard on her," he would say occasionally. "She's trying her best." "Of course she is, dear," Eleanor would respond, patting his cheek. "And I'm just helping her learn our ways. That's what mothers do." Margaret learned to walk on eggshells, measuring every word, every action, every breath. At family dinners, she sat quietly while Eleanor dominated the conversation, sharing stories of David's childhood, of family traditions, of people Margaret had never met and never would. She was present but invisible, included but separate. "Remember when David won that baseball championship?" Eleanor would say, her eyes shining with pride. "He was such a talented boy. Still is, of course. Smart, successful, everything a mother could want in a son." Patricia, David's sister, would join in. "And remember that girl he dated in college? What was her name?" "Sarah. She was from such a good family. Her father was a lawyer, just like Grandfather Miller." The implication was always clear. David could have done better. David should have chosen someone from his own world. Margaret tried to create her own space, her own connections. She volunteered at church, joined the women's Bible study group, helped organize community events. But even there, she felt Eleanor's shadow. The older woman had been a pillar of that community for decades, and her influence was everywhere. "Oh, you're David Miller's wife," people would say when meeting Margaret. "Eleanor speaks so highly of you." But their eyes told a different story, as if they knew something Margaret didn't, as if they were waiting for something to happen. At night, when she and David were alone, Margaret tried to share her feelings. "Sometimes I feel like I can't do anything right in your mother's eyes," she would say carefully. "No matter how hard I try. She's just set in her ways," David would respond, already half asleep. "Don't take it personally, that's just how she is." But it was personal. Every small criticism, every dismissed suggestion, every reminder that she was the outsider, it all accumulated like drops of water, slowly filling a cup until it overflowed. When Emma was born, Margaret thought things might change. Surely a grandchild would soften Eleanor's heart, would create a new bond between them, and for a brief moment it seemed possible. "She has the Miller eyes," Eleanor had said when she first held baby Emma, and Margaret's heart had soared with hope. Finally, something that connected her to this family through blood. But even motherhood became another arena for Eleanor's control. "That's not how we burp babies in this family. You're holding her wrong. Don't feed her that way. We don't use those kinds of products on Miller children." Margaret felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller and quieter with each passing day. She stopped offering opinions at family gatherings. She stopped suggesting new recipes or traditions. She stopped trying to assert herself in any way. Fear became her constant companion. Fear of making mistakes, fear of disappointing David, fear of giving Eleanor another reason to look at her with that expression of patient disappointment. "You're so quiet lately," David observed one evening. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Margaret lied, because the truth was too complicated, too painful, and she feared he wouldn't understand anyway. "I'm just tired." But it wasn't tiredness. It was the exhausting work of constantly monitoring herself, of living in a state of perpetual anxiety, of losing pieces of who she was in order to fit into a mold that would never accept her anyway. The house was beautiful, a classic American home with a white picket fence, a garden that bloomed in spring, rooms filled with family photos spanning generations. But for Margaret, it was a gilded cage, a place where she existed but never truly lived. She worked in that house like someone paying penance for an unknown sin. She served everyone with dedication, followed every rule with precision, and asked for nothing in return except to be accepted, to be valued, to be seen as more than an intruder who had somehow tricked their golden boy into marriage. But acceptance never came, and in that suffocating environment, where her voice grew quieter each day and her spirit dimmed like a candle running out of oxygen, something dark was taking root. Eleanor watched everything with those calculating eyes, noting every moment of Margaret's weakness, every crack in her confidence, every sign that David's faith in his wife might be wavering. And it was in this suffocating environment that evil found room to grow. Eleanor Miller had not always been a cruel woman. Once, many years ago, she had been a young bride herself, full of dreams and hope, but life had hardened her, shaped her into something cold and unyielding. Her husband had died when David was just 15, leaving her to raise 2 children alone and maintain the family's standing in the community. She had poured everything into David, every hope, every dream, every ounce of love she had left to give. He was her masterpiece, her redemption, her proof that she had done something right in this world. And when he brought Margaret home, Eleanor saw it not as a son finding love, but as a theft. This woman, this outsider with no family connections, no prestigious background, no understanding of their traditions, she had stolen Eleanor's boy. But Eleanor was too smart to show her hatred openly. She had learned long ago that direct confrontation was vulgar, that true power lay in subtlety, in the slow poison of small cuts that accumulated over time. "Good morning, dear," she would say sweetly to Margaret each day, while mentally cataloguing every tiny imperfection, a dish not quite clean enough, a pillow not fluffed properly, a smile that seemed forced. At family gatherings, Eleanor perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. "Margaret, that dress is lovely. So brave of you to wear something so colorful. I could never pull off such bold choices." The other women would laugh lightly, and Margaret would smile uncertainly, not quite sure if she had been complimented or criticized. "You've done such a nice job with dinner, dear. It's almost as good as the recipe I gave you." Almost. The word hung in the air like a blade. Eleanor's jealousy manifested in countless small ways. When David came home from work and hugged Margaret, Eleanor would suddenly need something. A glass of water, help with a stuck window, a question about an urgent matter. The moment was always interrupted, the intimacy always broken. "Oh, I'm so sorry to bother you too," she would say with false apology, "but you know how helpless I am with these things, and David has always been so good at helping his mother." When Margaret and David tried to have date nights, Eleanor would develop mysterious ailments. "I hate to be a burden," she would say weakly, "but I'm feeling so unwell. I probably just need someone to sit with me for a while. But you two go ahead. Don't worry about me." And David, ever the dutiful son, would cancel their plans. The cruelty was never explosive, never obvious enough for anyone to call it what it was. It was in the way Eleanor would praise Patricia's cooking, while barely acknowledging Margaret's efforts. It was in how she would share family stories that deliberately excluded Margaret, reminding everyone that this was a history Margaret could never truly be part of. "When David was a boy, we used to spend every summer at the lake house," Eleanor would say wistfully. "Just family. The real family, you understand. Those were such precious times." Margaret understood perfectly. Eleanor's jealousy deepened when Emma was born. Suddenly, there was another female competing for David's attention, another person who had a claim on his love that Eleanor couldn't control. She watched as David's eyes lit up when he looked at his daughter, the same way they used to light up when he looked at Margaret in their early days. "Be careful not to spoil her," Eleanor would warn constantly. "Children need discipline, structure. Too much affection makes them weak." But when David wasn't looking, Eleanor would hold Emma close, whispering things Margaret couldn't quite hear, creating a bond that deliberately excluded the child's mother. The breaking point came gradually. Eleanor began to notice that despite everything, despite all her efforts to make Margaret feel small and unwelcome, David still loved his wife. He still chose her, still defended her when Eleanor's criticisms became too pointed, still built a life with her that didn't center around his mother. That's when jealousy transformed into something darker. If she couldn't make David stop loving Margaret through small cuts and subtle manipulations, then she would need a different approach. She would need to destroy Margaret completely to remove her from David's life entirely. Eleanor started watching more carefully, looking for weaknesses, for opportunities, for anything she could use. She listened to phone conversations, read mail that came to the house, asked seemingly innocent questions designed to gather information. "Oh, Margaret, I saw you talking to that man at church last week. Who was he? Just curious, dear. I noticed you were out quite late yesterday. Everything okay? Where did you go? That's an interesting purchase. What do you need that for?" "Just wondering, sweetheart." Every piece of information was filed away, every moment catalogued, every interaction analyzed for potential use. Eleanor became a student of manipulation, learning how to plant seeds of doubt in David's mind without him realizing where they came from. "Margaret seemed so upset the other day. I hope everything's all right between you two. Marriage can be so difficult, especially when people come from different backgrounds." "I ran into Mrs. Henderson at the store. She mentioned seeing Margaret somewhere. I'm sure it was nothing, but you know how people talk in small towns." The lies hadn't started yet. Those would come later, but the groundwork was being laid, carefully and methodically, like a gardener preparing soil for a poisonous plant. At night, Eleanor would lie in her bed in the room down the hall, listening to the sounds of David and Margaret's life together, their quiet conversations, their laughter, the creaking of floorboards as they moved around their bedroom, and she would feel that jealousy burning in her chest like acid, eating away at whatever goodness might have once existed in her heart. She had given up everything for David. She had sacrificed her own happiness, her own life to raise him properly. And this was how he repaid her, by choosing some nobody over his own mother. "It's not right," she would whisper to herself in the darkness. "It's not fair." But Eleanor Miller had never been one to simply accept what she considered unfair. She was a woman of action, of careful planning, of patient revenge, and so she waited, watched, and prepared for the moment when she could finally drive Margaret out of their lives forever. She didn't know exactly how it would happen yet, but she knew it would. Opportunity always came to those who waited for it. When hatred is loud and obvious, people defend themselves against it. But Eleanor's hatred was quiet, disguised as concern, wrapped in the language of love and family duty. It was the kind of hatred that could destroy someone slowly, systematically, without ever showing its true face. Margaret felt it, but couldn't name it. She felt the coldness beneath the smiles, the cruelty hidden in the helpful suggestions, the rejection masked as inclusion. But how do you defend yourself against someone who never openly attacks? How do you fight an enemy who claims to be your ally? And when hatred is silent, it wounds more slowly and far more deeply. The lies didn't come all at once like a sudden storm. They seeped in slowly, like water finding cracks in a foundation, weakening the structure bit by bit until the whole thing was ready to collapse. Eleanor began her campaign with such subtlety that even she might have convinced herself she was just being protective of her son. It started with small observations delivered with perfect maternal concern. "David, dear, I couldn't help but notice that Margaret seems distracted lately," she said one evening after dinner. "Is everything all right with you two? I only ask because I care." "Everything's fine, Mom," David replied, barely looking up from his newspaper. "She's just tired. Taking care of Emma is a lot of work." Of course," Eleanor nodded sympathetically. "Though I did notice she's been making quite a few phone calls lately, always stepping out of the room to talk. I'm sure it's nothing, but you know how people talk in small towns. Appearances matter." David frowned slightly but said nothing. The seed was planted. A week later, another carefully chosen comment. "I ran into Sarah Mitchell at the grocery store today. You remember her, don't you? She asked about Margaret. Apparently someone saw her having coffee with a man at that cafe downtown. I told Sarah she must have been mistaken, but she seemed quite certain. Margaret has coffee with people all the time," David said, but there was an edge to his voice now. "She has friends." "Oh, I know, sweetheart. I just thought you should be aware in case anyone brings it up. I wouldn't want you to be blindsided by gossip." The lies grew bolder as weeks turned into months. Eleanor began creating situations that looked suspicious, then expressing innocent concern about them. She would call Margaret's phone when she knew David was nearby, then hang up when Margaret answered. "Strange," Eleanor would muse. "Someone keeps calling and hanging up on your phone, Margaret. Do you have any idea who it might be?" She would rearrange Margaret's belongings, then ask about purchases that Margaret claimed she didn't make. "That's odd, dear. Are you sure? I could have sworn I saw a receipt for this in your purse. Maybe you forgot?" Each incident was small, forgettable on its own, But together they created a pattern, a narrative that Eleanor carefully reinforced with perfectly timed observations. "David, I hate to mention this," she said one evening when Margaret was upstairs putting Emma to bed, "but I found this note in the trash. It looks like it's in Margaret's handwriting. Meet me at the usual place. I'm sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation, but it seemed unusual." The note, of course, had been written by Eleanor herself, a careful forgery after months of studying Margaret's handwriting. David's expression darkened. "Let me see that." "Oh," I threw it back away. "I shouldn't have said anything. I'm probably making something out of nothing. Forgive me, dear." But the damage was done. David started watching Margaret differently, noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. When she smiled at the mailman, was it just friendly or was it something more? When she took a long time at the grocery store, was she really shopping or meeting someone? Eleanor watched her son's growing suspicion with satisfaction. The foundation was cracking nicely. She escalated her campaign by creating anonymous letters, carefully composed to look like they came from a concerned neighbor. They arrived at David's office, where Margaret couldn't intercept them. "I thought you should know that your wife has been seen multiple times with another man. I'm telling you this as a friend because you deserve to know the truth. A concerned neighbor." David confronted Margaret that night. "Who have you been meeting?" "Meeting? I haven't been meeting anyone," Margaret said, confused and hurt by the accusation in his voice. "David, what's this about?" "Don't lie to me, Margaret. I've gotten letters. People have seen you." "Seen me what? Going to the store? Picking up Emma from the neighbor's house?" "David, you're not making sense." But her denials only seemed to confirm his suspicions. If she was innocent, Eleanor had whispered earlier, she wouldn't be so defensive. The lies became more elaborate. Eleanor began telling David stories about conversations she claimed to have had with Margaret. Conversations that never happened, where Margaret supposedly admitted to being unhappy in the marriage, to regretting her choices, to wishing she had married someone else. "She told me she feels trapped," Eleanor said sadly, "that she only stays because of Emma. I probably shouldn't have repeated it, but you're my son. You deserve to know what's really going on in your own marriage." David's love for Margaret was strong, but it was being tested in ways he didn't understand how to handle. He had been raised to trust his mother above all else, to believe that family loyalty was sacred, and now his mother was telling him that his wife was betraying that very loyalty. The warmth in David's eyes when he looked at Margaret began to fade, replaced by something colder, more distant. His tone when he spoke to her grew harder, more clipped. His touch, once tender and frequent, became rare and perfunctory. Margaret felt herself drowning in confusion and pain. She didn't understand what was happening, why the man who had loved her so completely was pulling away. Every time she tried to talk to him, he shut down or accused her of things she hadn't done. "David, please talk to me," she would beg. "Tell me what I've done wrong. Let me fix it." "If you don't know what you've done, then maybe that's the problem," he would respond coldly. Eleanor watched it all with the patience of a spider, waiting for the fly to exhaust itself in the web. She timed her revelations carefully, never giving too much at once, always leaving room for David's imagination to fill in the gaps with the worst possible scenarios. She created false evidence, receipts from restaurants Margaret had never been to, photographs that she claimed showed Margaret with another man, actually pictures she'd taken of strangers from a distance, phone records that she'd doctored to show calls to a number Margaret didn't recognize. "I found this in her coat pocket," Eleanor would say, producing another piece of fabricated evidence. "I'm so sorry, David. I wish I was wrong about all of this." The most devastating lie came 6 months before the final confrontation. Eleanor claimed she had seen Margaret herself in a neighboring town, holding hands with a man in a park. "I didn't want to believe it either," she said, tears streaming down her face in a performance worthy of an award. "But I saw them with my own eyes. They were laughing together, touching each other. When she saw me, she looked terrified, like she'd been caught. I'm so sorry, son. So sorry." It was a complete fabrication, but it was delivered with such emotion, such apparent pain on Eleanor's part, that David believed it completely. After that, every interaction between David and Margaret was poisoned by suspicion and hurt. The man who had once looked at his wife with adoration now could barely stand to be in the same room with her. The love that had once filled their home with warmth was dying, slowly suffocated by lies. Margaret tried everything to save her marriage. She suggested counseling, prayer meetings at church, date nights to reconnect. But David refused all of it, convinced that she was just trying to manipulate him, to cover up her supposed betrayal. At night, lying beside a husband who had become a stranger, Margaret would silently pray for understanding, for mercy, for whatever was breaking them apart to be revealed and healed. But her prayers seemed to disappear into a void, unanswered. She didn't know that down the hall Eleanor was also awake, planning the final move that would remove Margaret from their lives forever. The lies had done their work, softening David's heart, preparing him to believe the ultimate betrayal that Eleanor was about to reveal. And when trust dies, love no longer has the strength to defend itself. David Miller had once been a man who believed in truth, in fairness, in standing up for what was right. He'd been raised on stories of his grandfather, who had defended the innocent in the courtroom, who had believed that everyone deserved to be heard before being judged. But somewhere along the way, David had forgotten those lessons. The change in him was gradual, so slow that he didn't notice himself becoming someone he wouldn't have recognized a year earlier. He stopped asking Margaret about her day. He stopped listening when she spoke. He stopped seeing her as his partner and began viewing her as a problem that needed to be solved or removed. "How was your day?" Margaret would ask when he came home from work, Emma toddling toward him with arms outstretched. "Fine," he would answer shortly, picking up Emma but barely glancing at Margaret. "I made your favorite for dinner. Pot roast. Just the way you like it. I'm not hungry. I ate at the office." He hadn't eaten at the office. He just couldn't stand the thought of sitting across from her at the table, pretending everything was normal, when his mother's words echoed in his head constantly. "She's deceiving you. She's making a fool of you. Everyone in town knows except you." At church services, David would sit stiffly beside Margaret, leaving a careful space between them that spoke louder than words. When other church members greeted them warmly, asking how married life was treating them, David would smile tightly and say, "Fine, just fine," while Margaret stood silent beside him, feeling the weight of his coldness like a physical thing. Pastor Williams noticed, "David, son, is everything all right at home? You and Margaret seem distant lately." "Everything's fine, Pastor," David lied. "Just work stress, that's all." But it wasn't work stress. It was the daily accumulation of his mother's poison, the constant reinforcement that Margaret was betraying him, lying to him, making him look like a fool in front of the entire community. The worst part was his silence. When Eleanor made cutting remarks to Margaret at family dinners, David said nothing. When Patricia joined in with snide comments about Margaret's cooking or cleaning or child-rearing, David looked away. When neighbors repeated gossip they'd heard, gossip that Eleanor had carefully planted, David didn't defend his wife. "I heard your wife was seen with another man," said Tom Henderson one day at the hardware store. "Just thought you should know, buddy." Man to man. David's jaw tightened. "I appreciate you telling me," was all he said. Not, "That's ridiculous," or "My wife would never," or "Don't speak about Margaret that way." Just a quiet acceptance of the accusation, another brick in the wall he was building between himself and his marriage. Margaret felt the abandonment in every unspoken word, in every moment when David chose his mother's version of reality over his wife's protests of innocence. She was drowning, and the person who had promised to be her lifeline was standing on the shore, watching her sink. "David, please just talk to me," she begged one night after another silent dinner where he'd barely acknowledged her presence. "If I've done something wrong, tell me. Give me a chance to explain, to fix it, but don't just shut me out like this." He looked at her with eyes that had once held so much love, now cold and distant. "What's there to talk about, Margaret? My mother has told me everything. People have seen you. There's evidence. What could you possibly say that would change any of that?" "Evidence of what?" "David, I don't even know what I'm being accused of. Your mother hints at things. You treat me like a criminal, but nobody will tell me what I supposedly did." "Don't play games with me," he said harshly. "I'm not stupid, even if you think I am. I don't think you're stupid. I think you're being manipulated. Can't you see that your mother—" "Don't," he cut her off sharply. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on my mother. She's been nothing but good to you, welcoming you into this family, and this is how you repay her, by trying to make me think she's the problem." Margaret felt something inside her break. She realized in that moment that she could never win. No matter what she said, no matter how she pleaded, David had already made his choice. He had chosen his mother's lies over his wife's truth. He had chosen the easy comfort of his childhood loyalties over the harder work of defending his marriage. The silence in their house became oppressive. Days would pass with barely a word exchanged between them. David came home late from work more and more often, avoiding the confrontation that his presence created. When he was home, he stayed in his study or helped his mother with various tasks. anything to avoid being alone with Margaret. Emma, at 3 years old, couldn't understand why Daddy didn't smile at Mommy anymore, why there were no more family hugs, why the house felt so cold even though the heater was on. "Daddy sad?" she asked Margaret one day, her little face scrunched with worry. "Daddy's just tired, sweetheart," Margaret lied, holding her daughter close and trying not to let her tears fall. The community watched the dissolution of the Miller marriage with mixed reactions. Some felt sorry for David, believing Eleanor's carefully spread rumors that he had married an unfaithful woman. Others, particularly some of the older women who had known Eleanor for years, suspected the truth but said nothing, unwilling to go against someone so influential in their small town. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor, had tried once to reach out to Margaret. "Honey, I don't believe a word of what Eleanor is saying about you. I know a good woman when I see one." "Thank you," Margaret had whispered, tears streaming down her face at finally hearing someone defend her. "But I have to tell you," Mrs. Henderson continued sadly, "Eleanor has too much power in this town. If you try to fight her, you'll lose. Maybe it's time to think about leaving before things get worse." "I can't leave Emma," Margaret said. "She's my daughter. How can I leave my child?" Mrs. Henderson had just shaken her head sadly, unable to offer any solution to an impossible situation. David's choice of silence over defense, of distance over dialogue, of judgment over understanding, was slowly killing not just his marriage, but his own soul. He was becoming someone he wouldn't have respected a year ago, a man who let his mother control his life, who refused to communicate with his wife, who had forgotten that love required trust, and trust required giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Late at night, in the moments before sleep came, David would sometimes feel a flicker of doubt. What if he was wrong? What if Margaret was telling the truth? What if his mother was... But no, he couldn't finish that thought. To doubt his mother would be to question everything he'd built his life on: family loyalty, maternal wisdom, the belief that Eleanor would never lie to him. So he pushed the doubts away and hardened his heart a little more. The final conversation before everything exploded came 3 days before Margaret's expulsion from the house. David had stayed late at his office, not working but just sitting in the dark, trying to understand how his marriage had fallen apart so completely. When he came home, he found Margaret waiting up for him, sitting on their bed with red-rimmed eyes and a determined expression. "David, we need to talk," she said firmly. "Really talk. Not accusations, not silence. Talk." He stood in the doorway wanting to leave, but knowing he couldn't avoid this forever. "What is there to say, Margaret?" "Everything," she said. "There's everything to say. I need you to tell me exactly what you think I've done. I need you to listen to my side. I need you to remember that you once loved me enough to marry me, to have a child with me. That person I was then is the same person I am now. I haven't changed. I haven't betrayed you. But you've changed, David. You've become someone who would rather believe lies than have an uncomfortable conversation." For a moment, just a moment, David's resolve wavered. He looked at the woman sitting on their bed, the mother of his child, and he remembered the girl he'd fallen in love with. Kind, honest, dedicated. Could that person really be capable of what his mother claimed? But then Eleanor's voice echoed in his head. "She's manipulating you. This is what they do. They act innocent. They make you doubt yourself. They twist everything around. Stay strong, son. Don't let her fool you again." "I'm tired, Margaret," he said finally, his voice flat. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight." "David, please." "Good night, Margaret." He walked away, choosing the guest room over his marriage bed, choosing silence over communication, choosing his mother's comfort over his wife's pleas, and that silence hurt more than any harsh word ever could. The final accusation came on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when the autumn leaves were falling and the air had turned cold. Margaret was in the kitchen preparing Emma's lunch when Eleanor walked in with David following behind, his face set in stone. "We need to talk," Eleanor said, her voice carrying a tone of finality that made Margaret's blood run cold. "About what?" Margaret asked, setting down the sandwich she'd been making, her hands suddenly trembling. "About the fact that you've been stealing from this family," Eleanor said calmly, as if commenting on the weather. "About the money that's been disappearing from David's account. About the jewelry that's missing from my bedroom. About the lies you've been telling to cover up your affair." Margaret felt the room spin. "What? I haven't stolen anything. I don't even have access to David's account. Eleanor, what are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me," Eleanor said coldly. "I have bank statements showing regular withdrawals that you made. I have the security footage from the pawn shop where you sold my mother's necklace. I have photographs of you with that man. It's over, Margaret. The truth is finally out. That's not true. None of that is true. Margaret turned desperately to David. David, you know me. You know I would never steal from you, from your mother. Please, you have to believe me. But David's face was closed off, his eyes hard. I've seen the evidence, Margaret. My mother doesn't lie. She's lying now. David, please just look at me, really look at me. Do I look like someone who would steal from you, who would betray you? I love you. I love our family. If you loved our family, you wouldn't have destroyed it, David said quietly, and the words cut deeper than any shout could have. Emma toddled into the kitchen, sensing the tension. Mommy, Daddy, she said uncertainly, her little voice trembling. Eleanor moved quickly, scooping up the child. Come with Grandma, sweetheart. Mommy and Daddy need to talk. No! Margaret lunged forward, reaching for her daughter. Don't take her away from me. Emma, baby, come to Mommy. But David stepped between them, physically blocking Margaret from her own child. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder? You're taking my daughter away from me based on lies. How could this possibly be harder? Margaret's voice broke on a sob. David, please, I'm begging you. Just give me a chance to prove I'm innocent. Check the bank records yourself. You'll see I never made those withdrawals. Call the pawn shop. They'll tell you I've never been there. Talk to whoever this man is I supposedly had an affair with. He'll tell you we've never met. I've already checked everything, David said, and Margaret's heart shattered at the realization that he had been investigating her like a criminal rather than talking to her like a wife. The evidence is clear. What evidence? Show me. Let me see these bank statements, these photographs, this so-called proof. Eleanor smiled slightly, a triumph she couldn't quite hide. The evidence has been turned over to our lawyer. You'll see it soon enough during the divorce proceedings. Divorce? Margaret whispered. David, you can't mean that. We took vows. Before God, we promised. You broke those vows. David interrupted. When you betrayed this family, you broke every promise you ever made. Patricia appeared in the doorway, having been called by Eleanor for this exact moment. I've packed some of your things, she said to Margaret, holding a small suitcase. Just clothes and personal items. Nothing from this house that belongs to the Miller family. This is my house too, Margaret cried. I've lived here for 5 years. I've cleaned every corner, cooked every meal, cared for every person in this family. And stolen from us the whole time, apparently, Patricia said coldly. The realization crashed over Margaret like a wave. This had been planned. The suitcase was already packed. The family was already gathered. They had orchestrated this moment, timed it, prepared for it. She had never stood a chance. I want to say goodbye to Emma, Margaret said, her voice breaking. Please, at least let me say goodbye to my baby. Eleanor was already carrying Emma toward the stairs. I don't think that's appropriate. The child is confused enough. She's my child, Margaret screamed, all composure abandoning her. She came from my body. I carried her. I birthed her. I've raised her. You can't take her from me. Actually, I can, David said quietly. I'm filing for full custody. Based on your behavior, the theft, the infidelity, the instability, no judge will give you custody rights. Margaret collapsed to her knees on the kitchen floor, sobs racking her body. Everything she had feared, everything she had tried to prevent was happening. Her husband had turned against her. Her daughter was being taken from her. Her home, her family, her entire life was being stripped away based on lies she couldn't disprove because the evidence itself was fabricated. Please, she whispered, looking up at David through her tears. Please don't do this. I'm innocent. I swear before God, I'm innocent. David, you loved me once. Remember that person. I'm still her. I haven't changed, please. For just a second, something flickered in David's eyes. Doubt, or maybe just remembered love. But Eleanor's voice cut through the moment like a knife. David, do you really want to expose Emma to this? Look at how unstable her mother is. Think about what's best for your daughter. And just like that, whatever softness had appeared in David's face disappeared. You need to leave, Margaret, now. They escorted her to the door like a criminal being expelled from society. Neighbors had gathered on their porches, drawn by the commotion, witnessing Margaret's humiliation. Mrs. Henderson stood on her porch with tears streaming down her face, but she didn't intervene. No one did. At the threshold of the house that had been her home, Margaret turned one last time. Through the window she could see Emma in Eleanor's arms, the little girl crying and reaching toward the door, calling for her mother. Mama! Mama! Emma's cries pierced the air, and Margaret felt her heart being ripped from her chest. I'll come back for you, baby. Margaret called out, her voice raw. "Mommy will come back, I promise." "Don't make promises you can't keep," Eleanor said from inside, and then shut the door firmly, cutting off Emma's cries mid-sound. Margaret stood on that porch, in that small American town where everyone had watched her marriage dissolve, holding a single suitcase that contained all she was allowed to keep of 5 years of her life. She had no money. David had already frozen their joint account. She had no car. It was registered in his name. She had no family nearby. She'd moved to this town for David, leaving behind everyone she'd known. She had nothing except the truth, and in that moment the truth felt like the most worthless thing in the world. As she walked away from that house, carrying her small suitcase, Margaret heard Emma's muffled cries still coming from inside. That sound would haunt her for years to come, the memory of her daughter calling for her while she was being forced to walk away. And when the door closes, the hardest part of suffering begins. What comes after? The first night away from Emma, Margaret sat in a cheap motel room on the edge of town, staring at the walls and wondering how her life had collapsed so completely. She had $17 in her pocket, the clothes in her small suitcase, and a pain so deep it felt like drowning in dry land. She called David's phone 27 times that night. He never answered. She called the house landline. Eleanor picked up once, listened to Margaret's pleas to speak with Emma, and quietly hung up. After that, no one answered at all. By the second day, Margaret's money ran out. The motel manager, a kind older woman named Betty, took pity on her. "I can let you stay one more night," she said gently, "but after that I need the room for paying customers. Do you have anywhere to go?" Margaret shook her head. "I have nothing. No family here, no friends who would go against the Miller family, no money. I just want my daughter back." "Have you thought about getting a lawyer?" Betty asked. "With what money? I don't even have enough for food." Betty sighed and pressed a $20 bill into Margaret's hand. "Get yourself something to eat, and tomorrow, go to the church. Pastor Williams might be able to help." But when Margaret went to the church, she found that Eleanor's influence extended even there. Pastor Williams was sympathetic but hesitant. "Margaret, I want to help you, I really do, but the Miller family are major contributors to this church. If Eleanor says you stole from them, had an affair, I have to consider the reputation of the congregation." "So you're choosing money over truth?" Margaret asked bitterly. "Over helping someone in need?" "I'm choosing to be wise about situations I don't fully understand," he said carefully. "Perhaps it's best if you make a fresh start somewhere else. Somewhere the Miller name doesn't carry so much weight." Abandoned by her church, Margaret realized she had to leave the town entirely. She used Betty's $20 to buy a bus ticket to the city, 2 hours away. She left with nothing but her suitcase and a heart full of grief for the daughter she'd been forced to abandon. In the city, Margaret discovered just how invisible a person could become. She slept in a homeless shelter for 3 weeks, surrounded by others who had fallen through society's cracks. She stood in line at food pantries. She applied for every minimum wage job she could find. Finally, she got hired at a cleaning company, working night shifts in office buildings. The pay was barely enough to rent a room in a boarding house, a space so small she could touch opposite walls with her arms stretched out. But it was hers, and it was better than the shelter. Every penny she saved went toward 2 things: food and calling David's number. She called every week, then every month, always hoping to hear Emma's voice, always getting either silence or Eleanor's cold dismissal. "Stop calling here. You've been forbidden from contacting this family. If you persist, we'll get a restraining order. Please, just let me talk to my daughter for 2 minutes. Let me tell her I love her. Let me tell her I didn't abandon her." "You did abandon her. The moment you stole from this family, you abandoned her." Click. Years passed in a blur of exhaustion and grief. Margaret worked 12-hour shifts, came home to her tiny room, and cried herself to sleep thinking about Emma. What did she look like now? Did she even remember having a mother? What had Eleanor told her about why Margaret left? The holidays were the worst. Christmas, Emma's birthday, Mother's Day, each one was a fresh wound. Margaret would buy a small gift for Emma, wrap it carefully and mail it to the Miller house. The packages always came back marked, "Return to sender." She tried going through legal channels once. A lawyer who did pro bono work looked at her case and shook his head sadly. Without money for a good attorney, without evidence to counter what the Millers have presented, without witnesses willing to testify against one of the most influential families in their town, you don't stand a chance. I'm sorry. Sometimes the system fails good people. Margaret carried her grief like other people carried their shadow, always with her, darkening everything. She made no friends because how could she explain her story? How could she tell people she had a daughter she hadn't seen in years, a daughter who probably thought she'd been abandoned by her mother? The women at the boarding house where she lived noticed her sadness, but respected her privacy. Sometimes they would hear her crying at night through the thin walls, but they never asked. Everyone there had their own pain to carry. Margaret's physical appearance changed over the years. The stress turned her hair grey early. The poor nutrition made her thin and tired-looking. The constant sadness aged her face. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman she barely recognized. Where was the hopeful young bride who had tried so hard to belong to the Miller family? She attended a small church in the city, drawn by the need for some kind of spiritual comfort. The pastor there, an elderly man named Father Tom, was the first person in years who showed her genuine kindness without judgment. "Child, whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone," he said to her one Sunday after service. "God sees your pain. If God sees it, why doesn't he fix it?" Margaret asked, all the bitterness of years finally spilling out. "I've prayed every single day for my daughter. I've begged God to bring her back to me, to reveal the truth, to give me justice, but nothing changes. Nothing ever changes." Father Tom sat beside her in the empty church. "Sometimes God's timing isn't our timing. Sometimes the truth takes years to surface, but it does surface, child. Lies can't stay hidden forever." "It's been 5 years," Margaret whispered. "Emma is 8 years old now. She doesn't even know me." "Then pray for the day when she will," Father Tom said gently. "Pray that when the truth comes out, she'll be old enough to understand. Pray that God is protecting her even in that household of lies. And pray that you're strong enough to survive until that day comes." Margaret tried to hold on to that hope, but it was hard. Hope requires energy, and she had so little left after working all night, after eating cheap meals to save money, after enduring the loneliness of a life without family or love. She kept a small photo of Emma from when she was a baby, the only photograph she'd managed to keep. She looked at it every night before bed, trying to memorize every detail of her daughter's face, terrified that she would forget what Emma looked like. "I'm still your mother," she would whisper to the photograph. "No matter what they told you, no matter how many years pass, I'm still your mother, and I never stopped loving you, not for one single day." The pain of those years was not dramatic or visible. It was quiet, constant, grinding, the kind of suffering that slowly wears away at a person's soul like water wearing away stone. There were no witnesses to Margaret's tears, no one to validate her pain, no audience for her struggle. She was invisible to the world, just another poor woman in a big city, cleaning other people's offices while her own life remained in ruins. But hidden away in that tiny boarding house room, on scraps of paper and in cheap notebooks, Margaret kept records. She wrote down every detail she could remember about the day she was expelled, about Eleanor's accusations, about the supposed evidence she'd never been allowed to see. She documented every phone call, every returned package, every attempt to contact her daughter. "Someday," she told herself, "someday the truth will matter, and when that day comes, I'll be ready." It was the only thing that kept her going through years of pain that no one witnessed, through suffering that had no audience, through grief that remained unvalidated by the world. But not all pain kills. Some pain hardens us just enough to survive. The unraveling began 8 years after Margaret's expulsion, in the most unexpected way possible. Emma, now 11 years old, had developed an interest in family history for a school project. She asked Eleanor if she could look through old family photos and documents in the attic. "Of course not," Eleanor said sharply, then softened her tone at Emma's hurt expression. "I mean, those things are very delicate, sweetheart. Fragile family heirlooms, maybe when you're older." But Emma was persistent, the way children are when they've latched onto an idea. She asked David the same question that evening. David, who had become quieter and more withdrawn over the years, barely looked up from his newspaper. "Ask your grandmother." She said no. "But Dad, it's for school. I need information about our family history. Don't we have any old documents or photos?" Something in Emma's disappointed face stirred a memory in David, of his own childhood, of his father showing him old family photographs, telling him stories about his ancestors. When had he stopped sharing that kind of thing with his daughter? "All right," he said, surprising himself. "I'll go up to the attic with you this weekend. We can look together." Eleanor's face paled when she overheard this conversation. "David, I really don't think—" "It's fine, Mom. She's doing a school project. It's important." That Saturday, David and Emma climbed the stairs to the dusty attic while Eleanor paced nervously downstairs. The attic was filled with boxes of family memories, photos, letters, old documents that chronicled generations of Miller family history. Emma was thrilled, carefully pulling out photographs and asking about each person. "Who's this, Dad?" "That's your great-grandfather. He was a lawyer, very respected in the community." They worked their way through several boxes, David finding himself enjoying the time with his daughter, something he realized he hadn't done enough of lately. And then Emma found a box that had been pushed to the back, behind several others, clearly meant to stay hidden. "What's in this one?" she asked, pulling it forward. David frowned. He didn't recognize this box. Opening it, he found himself looking at items he'd never seen before: bank statements, photographs, documents. His confusion grew as he started to examine them more closely. The bank statements were for an account he didn't recognize, but they had Eleanor's name on them. The photographs showed Eleanor at a pawn shop, not Margaret as she'd claimed. And then he found letters, correspondence between Eleanor and a private investigator, discussing creating evidence and planting doubts. David's hands began to shake as he read through document after document. There were forged bank statements with Margaret's signature, but next to them, the originals showing Eleanor had made the withdrawals herself. There were the actual photographs Eleanor had claimed showed Margaret with another man, but a closer look revealed they were doctored, with a woman who didn't even look much like Margaret if you examined it carefully. "Dad, what's wrong?" Emma asked, seeing her father's face turn white. "Go downstairs, Emma," David said quietly. "Now." "But now," he said more sharply than he'd intended. Emma scrambled down the attic ladder, frightened by her father's tone. David stayed in the attic, surrounded by evidence of his mother's systematic destruction of his marriage, and felt his entire world crumbling. There was a journal, too, written in Eleanor's handwriting. He opened it and began to read, each word like a knife to his heart. "David still loves her despite everything I've told him. I need to accelerate my plans. The girl must go. She's stealing my son from me. Created bank statements today showing Margaret making withdrawals. Easy enough to forge her signature. David won't question it coming from me. Told David I saw Margaret with another man in Clarkson. Complete lie, of course, but he believed it. He believes everything I say. That's the benefit of being his mother. He trusts me absolutely. Soon she'll be gone and I'll have my son back. Everything will be as it should be." Page after page documented Eleanor's manipulation, her lies, her systematic campaign to destroy Margaret. And David, holding this journal in his hands, realized with devastating clarity what he had done. He had believed his mother without question. He had expelled his innocent wife from their home. He had taken Emma away from her mother. He had spent 8 years believing a lie so complete, so well constructed, that he'd never thought to question it. "Oh God," he whispered, the journal falling from his shaking hands. "Oh God, what have I done?" He stumbled down from the attic, the box of evidence in his arms. Eleanor was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, her face carefully composed. "David, dear, did you find what Emma needed for her project?" "I found everything," he said, his voice hoarse. "Everything you did, everything you lied about." Eleanor's mask slipped for just a moment, and David saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Cold calculation, not maternal love. "David, whatever you think you found, I found your journal," he shouted, all the pain and rage of 8 years exploding out of him. "I found the bank record showing you made those withdrawals. I found your correspondence with the private investigator. I found everything, Mother. Everything." Emma stood in the hallway, watching with wide, frightened eyes as her father and grandmother faced off. "You destroyed my marriage," David said, tears streaming down his face. "You took Emma's mother away from her. You made me into someone who expelled his innocent wife from our home without even listening to her side. All because of your lies." Eleanor's face hardened. "I did what was necessary to protect you. That woman was taking you away from your family, from your real family. She was my real family, she was my wife, and you destroyed her. You destroyed us." David sank onto the stairs, the weight of his realization crushing him. Margaret was innocent. This whole time she was innocent, and I threw her out like garbage. Patricia, who had been in the kitchen, came running at the sound of shouting. "What's going on?" "Ask your mother," David said bitterly. "Ask her how she fabricated evidence to destroy my marriage. Ask her how she lied to me for 8 years. Patricia looked at Eleanor uncertainly. "Mom?" But Eleanor's silence was answer enough. The truth was finally out, and there was no talking her way around the physical evidence David held in his hands. Emma, trying to understand what was happening, asked the question that broke David completely. "Dad, are you saying—" My mum didn't leave us. She didn't steal from us. Grandma lied. David looked at his daughter, this girl who had grown up believing her mother had abandoned her, who had been raised on lies, and felt the full weight of what Eleanor had stolen from both of them. Yes, sweetheart, he said, his voice breaking. Grandma lied about everything. Your mother never wanted to leave you. She never stole anything. She loved you more than anything in the world. Where is she now? Emma asked, tears beginning to fall. Where's my mum? And David realized with horror that he had no idea. He had expelled Margaret 8 years ago with nothing, no money, no car, no resources, and had never once wondered what had happened to her. Had she survived? Was she even still alive? I don't know, he whispered. I don't know where she is. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice sharp with desperation. David, you're overreacting, so I may have exaggerated some things, but it was for your own good. Get out, David said quietly. What? Get out of my house, he said louder now. Pack your things and get out. I don't want you here. I don't want you near Emma. I don't want to see your face. This is my home too. You can't just... This was Margaret's home, David shouted. This was her home and you drove her out with lies. Now I'm doing the same to you, except I actually have a reason. Get out. Eleanor looked at Patricia for support, but Patricia turned away, unable to meet her mother's eyes. The evidence was too clear, the betrayal too complete. That night, as Eleanor packed her belongings, David sat in his study with the box of evidence, trying to piece together how to find Margaret, how to make this right. But how could he make right such a profound wrong? How could he ever apologize for 8 years of suffering based on lies? Emma came to him, her face streaked with tears. Will we find her, Dad? Will we find Mom? I don't know, sweetheart, David said honestly, but I'm going to try. I'm going to do everything in my power to find her and tell her the truth. But there are mistakes that not even the truth can erase. Finding Margaret took David 3 months of searching. He hired a private investigator, ironically the same one Eleanor had used to fabricate evidence against Margaret. When the man realized what Eleanor had done, he waived his fee out of guilt for his role in the deception. She told me it was for your protection, he said to David. Said your wife was dangerous. I should have asked more questions. The trail led to the city, to the boarding house where Margaret had lived for years, but she'd moved 6 months earlier. Finally, through church records, Father Tom had kept in touch with Margaret and knew where she'd gone. They found her. She was living in a small apartment in a different part of the city, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. She'd become a housekeeper for several families during the day and worked at a grocery store at night. It wasn't much of a life, but it was stable, and stability was more than she'd had for years. When David knocked on her door that Sunday afternoon, Margaret almost didn't open it. She was exhausted from working a double shift, looking forward to her one day off, and wasn't expecting visitors. But something made her answer. And when she opened the door and saw David standing there, 8 years older and holding a box of papers, every emotion she'd suppressed came flooding back. Margaret, he said, his voice breaking on her name. She tried to close the door. You need to leave. Oh, wait, please, I know the truth now. I know everything. My mother lied about all of it. Margaret laughed bitterly. It took you 8 years to figure that out. I found evidence. In the attic, documents, bank statements, her journal where she wrote about fabricating everything. Margaret, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. Sorry? Margaret's voice rose. You're sorry. You threw me out of my home. You took my daughter from me. You let your mother destroy my life, and you never once questioned whether I might be innocent. And now you're sorry? I know it's not enough, David said, tears streaming down his face. I know nothing I say can make up for what I did to you, but I needed you to know the truth came out. I needed you to know I know you were innocent all along. Margaret stood in her doorway, looking at the man who had once been her husband, the man who had broken her heart so completely. Part of her wanted to slam the door in his face, to let him feel just a fraction of the rejection she'd felt, but another part, the part that had loved him once, wanted to understand. Why now? She asked. What changed? Emma found the box. She was doing a school project on family history. If she hadn't found it, I might never have known. At the mention of Emma's name, Margaret's composure cracked. How is she? She's 11 now, smart, beautiful, stubborn, just like her mother. She wants to see you, Margaret. She knows the truth now. She knows you didn't abandon her. Margaret's knees went weak and she grabbed the doorframe for support. She knows. Yes, and she's been crying for days, asking when she can meet her mom. For 8 years, Margaret had imagined this moment. In her daydreams, she was strong, collected, able to face David and Eleanor with dignity. But now, hearing that Emma wanted to see her, all that strength dissolved into tears. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't see her. Look at me, David. Look at where I live, how I live. I'm not the mother she deserves. I'm broken." "You're broken because of what we did to you," David said. "Because of what I did to you. But Emma doesn't care about any of that. She just wants her mother." Margaret looked at this man who had destroyed her life, who now stood at her door asking for forgiveness, offering her back the daughter who had been stolen from her. And she felt the weight of 8 years of pain threatening to crush her. "I need time," she said finally. I can't just jump back into her life like nothing happened. She's been told I abandoned her for 8 years. I can't undo that kind of damage overnight." "I understand," David said quietly, "but can I at least give you this?" He handed her the box of evidence. "Everything that proves your innocence, everything that shows what my mother did, it's yours. You deserve to have it." Margaret took the box with shaking hands. Inside was proof of everything she'd claimed for 8 years, every truth she'd been denied the chance to speak. "Where's Eleanor now?" she asked. "I made her leave. She's living with Patricia. She tried to apologize, but—" David shook his head. "Some things are unforgivable. And yet you're here asking me to forgive you," Margaret observed. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," David said. "I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know the truth came out, and I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to meet Emma, not as my wife, not even as my friend, just as her mother, because regardless of what I did, you are her mother, and she needs you." Margaret stood silent for a long moment, holding the box of evidence that had come 8 years too late. She thought of all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, all the birthdays and holidays she'd missed, all the years she'd lost with her daughter. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Give me your phone number. I'll call you when I'm ready." David nodded, writing his number on a piece of paper with trembling hands. "Thank you. Just thank you for considering it." As he turned to leave, Margaret called out, "David?" He turned back, hope flickering in his eyes. "I want you to know something," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. "I did love you. I loved you with everything I had. I would have done anything for our family. And you threw it away without even giving me a chance to defend myself. Whatever happens next, whatever relationship I might have with Emma, don't expect me to ever forget that. Don't expect me to ever trust you again." David nodded, the hope in his eyes dying. "I understand. I don't expect anything from you, Margaret. I just wanted you to know the truth." After he left, Margaret sat in her small apartment, holding the box of evidence, and wept. Not tears of relief or joy, but tears of grief for everything that had been lost, everything that could never be recovered. She opened Eleanor's journal and read through it, seeing in black and white just how calculated, how cruel, how systematic the destruction of her life had been. And she felt her anger rising in her. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, determined kind. Eleanor had taken 8 years from her, 8 years of her daughter's life, 8 years of suffering based on lies. And while David seemed to think expelling Eleanor from his home was sufficient justice, Margaret knew it wasn't. Not nearly. She picked up her phone and called David's number. He answered on the first ring. "I'll meet Emma," Margaret said, "but not at your house. And not yet. First, I want to see Eleanor." "Margaret, I don't think that's a good idea." "I don't care what you think," Margaret interrupted, her voice hard. "That woman destroyed my life and spent 8 years living comfortably while I struggled to survive. Before I meet my daughter, before I even think about moving forward, I want to look Eleanor in the eyes and tell her exactly what she did to me. She owes me that much." There was a long silence. Then David sighed. "All right, I'll arrange it. But Margaret, be careful. My mother is dangerous when she's cornered." "So am I," Margaret said quietly. "So am I." The meeting was arranged at Pastor Williams's church, neutral ground where Eleanor couldn't refuse to come without making her guilt even more obvious to the community. The news of Eleanor's deception had spread through the small town like wildfire, and for the first time in decades, the powerful Miller matriarch found herself the subject of whispers and judgment rather than respect. Margaret walked into that church for the first time in 8 years, dressed in the best clothes she owned, which weren't much, but she held her head high. Father Tom had come with her for moral support, as had Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had tried to warn Margaret years ago. Eleanor sat in a front pew, Patricia beside her. When she saw Margaret enter, something flickered across her face. Was it shame, fear, regret? Margaret couldn't tell and didn't care. David was there too, with Emma. When the little girl saw Margaret, she stood up uncertainly. "Mum?" Margaret's heart broke and healed at the same moment. She looked at her daughter, tall now, with David's eyes and her own smile, and felt 8 years of grief crystallize into this single moment. "Hi, sweetheart," Margaret said softly, approaching slowly. "You're so big now, so beautiful." Emma ran to her then, throwing her arms around Margaret in a hug that made everything, all the pain, all the years, all the suffering, almost worth it. Margaret held her daughter and cried, feeling pieces of her broken heart trying to fit back together. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "I'm so sorry I believed Grandma. I thought you left me." "No, baby. I never left you. I was forced away, but I never stopped loving you. Not for one single day." After a long moment, Margaret gently pulled back. "But right now, sweetie, I need to talk to your grandmother. Can you wait with your dad?" Emma nodded and returned to David's side, watching everything with wide eyes. Margaret turned to face Eleanor. The older woman looked diminished somehow, smaller than she had in Margaret's memories, but when their eyes met, Margaret saw no real remorse there, only the anger of someone who had been caught. "You destroyed my life," Margaret said simply, her voice calm but carrying through the church. "You spent years poisoning my husband against me, fabricating evidence, telling lies so elaborate that I couldn't defend myself against them. You took my daughter from me when she was 3 years old. You made me into a homeless woman with nothing and no one, all because you couldn't stand to share your son's love." "I did what I thought was best for David," Eleanor said stiffly. "You were taking him away from his family." "I was his family," Margaret's voice rose. "I was his wife. I was the mother of his child. But you couldn't accept that anyone could love him except you, could you? You had to be the only woman in his life, the only one who mattered." Pastor Williams stepped forward. "Eleanor, the entire congregation knows the truth now. We've seen the evidence. The question is, are you willing to acknowledge what you did, to genuinely repent?" Eleanor's face hardened. "Repent for protecting my son, for ensuring he wasn't trapped in a marriage to someone who wasn't worthy of the Miller name." "There it is," Margaret said quietly. "After everything, after all the evidence, you still believe I wasn't worthy. You still believe you were right. You were an outsider," Eleanor said, standing now, her voice sharp with years of suppressed rage. "You came from nothing, had no family connections, no standing in this community. David could have married someone better, someone from a good family, but he chose you, and I had to watch as he threw away everything I'd worked to build for this family. So you destroyed an innocent woman's life," Father Tom said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You separated a mother from her child. You made your own son into someone who could throw out his wife without giving her a chance to defend herself, all because of pride and jealousy." The truth hung in the air like smoke, undeniable and choking. David stood up, his face pale. "Mum, I asked you here hoping you would apologize, hoping you would show some remorse for what you did, but you can't, can you? You still think you were right." "I was right," Eleanor insisted. "I was protecting you." "You were destroying me," David's voice cracked. "You turned me into someone I'm ashamed of, someone who could believe the worst of his wife without question, someone who could take a child from her mother. I've lost 8 years with Margaret, and Emma has lost 8 years with her mother because of your lies, and those years are gone," Margaret added quietly. "Emma's first day of school, her first lost tooth, her first communion at church. I missed all of it. You stole those moments from me, and nothing can give them back." Eleanor looked around the church at the faces staring at her son's disgust, her granddaughter's confusion, the community's judgment, and for the first time, her mask of superiority cracked completely. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words rang hollow, too little and far too late. "Sorry doesn't give me back 8 years," Margaret said. "Sorry doesn't erase the nights I spent homeless, hungry, crying for my daughter. Sorry doesn't undo the lies you told Emma about me. Sorry is just a word, Eleanor, and words mean nothing from someone who lied as easily as breathing." "What do you want from me?" Eleanor asked, and for the first time she sounded genuinely afraid. "I want you to feel what I felt," Margaret said honestly. "I want you to know what it's like to lose everything. I want you to understand the depth of pain you caused, but I know that's impossible. People like you don't feel empathy for others. You only understand your own pain." Margaret turned to David. "I'm willing to build a relationship with Emma, but I need you to understand something clearly. I'm not doing this for you. I'm not doing this to forgive you or to rebuild what we had. That's gone, destroyed by your choice to believe your mother over your wife." "I understand," David said quietly. "Emma, Margaret said, turning to her daughter. "I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me. But it's going to take time. We need to get to know each other again. And I need you to understand that the years we lost are really lost. I can't get them back. We can only move forward from here." Emma nodded through her tears. "I just want my mom back." "Then you'll have me," Margaret promised. "As much as you want, as often as you want. I'm not going anywhere ever again." Over the following months, Margaret and Emma built a relationship slowly, carefully. They met for lunch every Saturday, went to church together on Sundays, talked on the phone every night. Emma learned about her mother's struggles, her survival, her strength. Margaret learned about her daughter's life, her interests, her fears. David provided financial support. It was the least he could do, he said. He paid for Margaret to move into a better apartment, helped her get a better job, offered to pay for anything she needed. But he never asked for forgiveness, never expected reconciliation. He understood that some betrayals are too deep to overcome. Eleanor was effectively exiled from the family and the community. Patricia maintained minimal contact out of obligation, but even she couldn't forgive what her mother had done. Eleanor lived alone in a small apartment, her influence gone, her reputation destroyed, her family lost to her. 1 year after the truth came out, Margaret and Emma sat in a cafe, celebrating Emma's 12th birthday. The girl was smiling, happy, secure in her mother's love. But as Margaret watched her daughter blow out candles on a cupcake, she felt the weight of all those lost birthdays, all those missed moments. "Are you okay, Mom?" Emma asked, noticing Margaret's tears. "Yes, sweetheart," Margaret said, wiping her eyes. "I'm just thinking about how much I love you and how grateful I am to have you back in my life." "I love you too," Emma said. "And Mom, I know we lost a lot of years, but we have now, right? And we'll have tomorrow, and the day after that." Margaret smiled through her tears. "Yes, baby, we have now." But that night, alone in her apartment, Margaret looked at the photograph she'd kept of baby Emma, the one that had sustained her through 8 years of separation, and felt the full weight of what had been stolen from her. There was Emma learning to walk. She'd missed it. There was Emma's first day of kindergarten. She'd missed it. There were 8 Christmases, 8 birthdays, 8 years of bedtime stories and skinned knees and mother-daughter moments, all missed, all gone forever. She had forgiven Emma. How could she not? The child was innocent in all this. She had even found a measure of peace for herself, a way to move forward, but she had not forgiven David, and she never would. Some betrayals are too profound, some abandonments too complete. He had chosen his mother's lies over his wife's truth, had taken a child from her mother without investigation, had left Margaret with nothing and never once checked if she survived. And Eleanor, Margaret didn't waste energy on hating her anymore. Eleanor had become exactly what she deserved to be. Alone, rejected, powerless. The woman who had destroyed a family to maintain control had lost everything she tried to protect. The lesson was clear and bitter. Jealousy, lies, and pride had destroyed an entire family. Eleanor's inability to share her son's love had cost everyone years they could never recover. David's willingness to believe without questioning had made him complicit in injustice, and Margaret and Emma had paid the price for both their failures. There was redemption of a sort. The truth had come out. The relationship between mother and daughter was being rebuilt. Justice had been served in its own way. But redemption couldn't turn back time. It couldn't give Margaret back the years she'd lost, the moments she'd missed, the suffering she'd endured. Some things, once broken, can never truly be repaired. Some scars, even when healed, remain visible forever. There is forgiveness, but no forgetting. There may be reconciliation, but the scars remain. The lesson is clear and painful. Interference, lies, and pride can destroy entire families. This is a story that happened right here in America, in one of those small towns where secrets are supposed to stay hidden, but never really do. It's a story about how jealousy can turn a mother into a destroyer, how silence can make a husband into a betrayer, and how lies can steal years from innocent lives. Margaret and Emma are rebuilding their relationship day by day. They've learned that time lost can't be recovered, but time ahead can be cherished. They've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stays, who fights for you, who refuses to give up even when everyone else does. David lives with the knowledge of what he destroyed. No amount of financial support, no number of apologies, can give back what his willingness to believe lies without question cost him. He sees his daughter every week, but he's no longer her hero. He's the man who threw her mother out without listening. Eleanor sits alone in her apartment, the architect of her own isolation. She destroyed a family to keep her son close, and in doing so, lost him completely. But here's what I want you to think about. How many families are being destroyed right now by interference, by lies, by people who can't let their adult children build their own lives? How many mothers-in-law are poisoning marriages with subtle manipulation? How many spouses are choosing their parents over their partners without asking the hard questions? And more importantly, are you strong enough to defend your marriage against outside interference? Are you brave enough to question what you're told, even by people you trust? Would you have the courage to investigate before you judged, to listen before you condemned? Because Margaret's story could be happening to someone you know right now. It could be happening to you. The only difference between Margaret and countless other innocent people is that her truth eventually came out. How many others never get that chance? If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own relationships, your own family dynamics, your own willingness to believe or doubt, then share it. Talk about it. Learn from it. Don't let pride destroy what love built. Don't let jealousy poison what trust created. And never ever throw someone away without giving them a chance to be heard. I want you to subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell, because stories like this, stories that challenge us to be better, to love more carefully, to judge less quickly, these are the stories that can change lives. And right now, click on the video appearing on your screen. The groom called off wedding because bride was poor, not knowing she'd become a millionaire later. Yeah, it's another powerful story about truth, survival, and the strength of women who refuse to be silenced. Because in the end, the truth always matters. Always. Even when it comes 8 years too late.